Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody's happy and that today's event will be informative and useful for those of you attending. We'll get started in just a few moments. We'll give it like a minute or two more to see if any other colleagues join us. My name's Gareth Dyke. You can see my face down there on the slide as well. I'm happy, delighted, over the moon to be presenting this webinar today on behalf of Bentham Science publishers. So we'll just wait for just a few moments before we get started to give more colleagues time to join us. I think just one more minute. Let's just wait one more minute. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. Don't worry, I'll turn my camera off in a moment. But if you can hear me, it would be fantastic if somebody could just confirm that in the webinar chat. Of course, as with all of these events, you are welcome to write your comments and questions into the chat box, and we will certainly have time to answer them throughout the presentation. Maybe interrupt or I'll answer questions as we go through the content today, because of course we are talking today about ethics. Avoiding those ethics disasters, understanding research and publishing ethics. All right, it's just after 2 o'clock, so we'll get started with our content today. Thank you so much for joining me once again. My name is Gareth Dyke, and it's my pleasure to present this webinar today on behalf of Bentham Science publishers, understanding research and publishing ethics, avoiding those ethics disasters. And that's very important, of course. Like, you need to be aware of the ethics involved in writing and publishing an academic paper in order that you do not make the same mistakes that other people have made in the past. Who am I? Well, this is me, Gareth Dyke. As I mentioned, I've worked in the UK, I've worked in the US, I've worked in Ireland, I've worked in Hungary, and I've published lots of papers in my career, some in good journals and some that have been highly cited, and have been involved for a number of years as a journal editor, working with companies like Bentham Science publishers, which gives me some insights, I hope, from both sides of the coin to help authors with their research and publishing journey. So today, ethics. We will begin with a quick overview of the publishing process, because we're going to come back to this on a number of occasions through our presentation today to talk about some of the issues. Of course, this is not news to anybody listening to this presentation. We as authors submit our papers into the peer review system. We then revise them and resubmit them, and hopefully they get accepted and then go into production. I show you this because each of these steps along the way provides an opportunity for unethical behavior or ethical issues in the publication process. And you saw this last time we met on Monday as well, as we go round and around that hamster wheel of academic publishing from beginning to end. We are, as authors, as publishers, as academics, facing ethical issues at each step of the academic publishing cycle. So let's get started. Let's think about what this might mean for us as authors, as researchers, as publishers. Well, research and publishing ethics encompasses a number of important areas: safety, submissions, plagiarism, preventing cheating, authorship issues, and conflicts of interest. And maybe you've come across some of these in your own work. Maybe you've come across some of these in your own experience as a publisher, as an academic working at a university. We encourage all of our young researchers, all of our authors, to have a think about these issues before they begin the publishing process. Safety, ethical board approval, submissions. You're only allowed to submit your article to one journal. You can't republish if something has already been published, and you can't manipulate peer review, and so on. It goes on down the checklist: plagiarism, cheating, authorship, we'll talk about that in a minute, and conflicts of interest. One of the most common questions that we often get asked, how to express your conflicts of interest, if you have any, in your articles, your funding sources, and your financial personal relationships that might bias the work. There are, of course, two things to remember as we go through our training sessions this week, and it's my pleasure to present them on behalf of Bentham Science publishers to our friends and colleagues at the ANCUS Consortium. You can improve your writing. English communication is a skill, not a talent. And of course, you can learn to avoid those common mistakes that lots of authors tend to make, even the ones that they make often. So let's get going. Let's start about some common ethical issues to consider before you begin the writing process in section 1 of this presentation. If you are not aware of these reporting guidelines, then you should be, because lots of fields, lots of areas of research have already established reporting guidelines for research. And a great place to go to get access to a lot of this information is the equatornetwork.org. We also often show this slide to young researchers thinking about starting with a research project, because lots of reporting guidelines have already been developed for your subject area. So, for example, if you're doing observational studies, there's a checklist for that. If you're doing qualitative studies, there's a checklist for that, and so on it goes. Have a look at the Equator Network guidelines before beginning a research project. And we ask people also, young researchers, what is original research? Well, original research has not been published before. No prior translations, no redundancy, no salami publishing, we'll come back to that in a minute, and no media publicity, often beyond initial conference material. Pre-publication is difficult. If in doubt, be transparent. Check who the copyright owner is. If you're thinking of pre-publishing something that you may have in some form published before, like an abstract or a poster or a thesis or dissertation. We can also help with information about this if you'd like to get in touch. We are always available to help with lots of these issues. So check first. Publishing original research if you have permission and you have references, your preprints, working papers, discussion papers, blogs, reports, and so on. And a great resource that we'll come back to again later in this presentation today is that thinkchecksubmit.org website, where you can go and think about where an appropriate journal would be for your next paper, Bentham Science publishers, or indeed some of these checklists to have a look at before you begin the writing and publishing process. It's important to be honest as an academic, your own effort and work, so don't plagiarize. Don't use ghostwriters or paper mills. Don't make up, alter, or omit data. Don't delete or alter records or keep poor records. And don't cheat or help others to cheat. These are some key definitions of academic honesty. One of the most common questions that we often get asked is, should I share my slides? Simple questions like this. After giving a conference talk, where we ask people to think what was in those slides and who was in the audience. If your work's not published yet, it's a good idea to think about putting it on a preprint server. You can do this to get around lots of those copyright issues. Unethical authorships often come up as well. Two of the most common kinds are ghost authorship. This is where someone who did lots of work writing a paper is not included as an author. So, for example, you might pay somebody to write the paper for you, which is called ghostwriting, common in medical and pharmaceutical fields. But is it ethical? Something for discussion. Maybe you've got some questions about that for the end of our session today. Gift authorship as well. This is where somebody who did not contribute to an article is nevertheless included as an author. Your boss, the director. It's common, especially in papers written by early career researchers. But is it ethical? Something for discussion at the end of our session. Top tips for authorship. Decide and agree before starting to write. Who's an author and the order of authors, and check those ICMJE guidelines. I'll show you those in a minute. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. That is a great resource, even if you're not a medical journal editor. Great place to look because they've got some definitions about what constitutes authorship that you can follow. Something else that we get often asked about in our sessions is this question of, can I be a joint first author? So implying that two authors contributed equally to the paper. As you can see here in this example, the use of joint first authorships is quite common in some fields. Authors are designated as joint first authors. But again, what does that mean for you and for your career, for your research? Be careful about agreeing to joint first authorships. Are these meaningful or are they just cosmetic? In reality, of course, somebody else's name would always come first, and so the paper would always be cited in a certain way. Also, I highlight for you the huge issue now that we face in the publishing industry with paper mills. A recent Committee on Publication Ethics forum discussion focused on the significant problem of paper mills. This is where made-up papers get submitted to journals for a fee on behalf of researchers with the purpose of providing an easy publication or to offer authorship for sale. So something else to be aware of in terms of ethics in research, because paper mills are actually quite common. As you can see here, lots of papers in this Nature analysis of articles alleged to have come from paper mills. So people are doing it. It's available out there. It's something to be aware of. It's something to avoid. But of course, these services do exist for researchers because, ethically speaking, you should write up and publish your own research, not pay for fake papers or undeserved authorships. Mills create huge issues with the integrity of published work. Of course they do, as well as authorship issues. These papers also often contain fake or manipulated data, stock images, and extensive plagiarism. And the plagiarism is often not detected immediately because these articles can often be translated versions of others. So it's a serious issue. We highlight for colleagues the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity, honesty in all aspects of research, accountability in the conduct of research, professional courtesy and fairness, and good stewardship of research on behalf of others. No misconduct or fraud. Here's a list of some common kinds of misconduct or fraud that we encounter as editors: wrong observations or analysis, careless record keeping, biased or altered study design, data fabrication, falsification, selection and or omission, the misuse of public funds, breaking of rules, local and national, and illegal human and animal experimentation. If you're thinking of doing research on animals, you need to get consent from your university, from your institution, and make sure that you do follow the famous Declaration of Helsinki. We respect human rights, of course we do, and so human studies require ethical approval from an ethics committee before the study begins. One of the biggest problems that medical journals face around the world is retrospectively approved studies that then try to get submitted for publication. That's not okay. For studies with prospective assignments, register your trial protocol before enrollment. You need informed consent and you need to protect personal information, keeping people's data anonymized and confidential, keeping all data secure. Reporting guidelines, as we talked about earlier, are very important. And I've shown you already the Equator Network guidelines on a previous slide for specific study types. There's also GPP3, Good Publication Practice Guidelines for Industry-Sponsored Medical Research. That fantastically acronymed International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and the Committee on Publication Ethics Guidelines. All great places to have a look if you'd like to follow up on any of this. What about data management and presentation? Well, this is also very important. What about issues that we face during the writing process? Common ethical issues to consider would include reporting methods incompletely to prevent replication, misleading interpretation, ignoring the work of others, not checking the latest versions, overlooking the use of others and using flawed data, citing retracted material, not declaring financial or non-financial conflicts of interest listed here, some of the most common that people tend not to talk about when they're asked to report those conflicts of interest in their papers. Publishing in or using fake journals. Have a look again. Let me emphasize, thinkchecksubmit.org is a great resource for you to have a look at some of the places where you could find problems or issues with journals. We need to make sure that we make sure to quote the work of others, citing our sources, obtaining copyright permission if needed, referencing carefully, acknowledging people who helped, technical, statistical, art, editorial, acknowledging funders and donors of material, and for presentations and publications, check your authorship. So it's important to do this. Here's a checklist for writing the different sections of your paper. Why did you do the study? In the introduction, after doing a thorough literature review. The methods talk about what you did. What are the participants, the materials, appropriate techniques? Analyses. What did you find in the results, including unexpected, negative, or null results? And how does your work contribute to the field in the discussion? Literature, similarities and differences, and limitations. You need accurate referencing, ethics statements, clinical trial numbers, funding, conflicts of interest, and data accessibility. If you would like training for your university students, for your colleagues, for people in your research group on writing academic papers, we would be more than happy to provide that at any time. Just get in touch with us after this presentation to talk more. Ethics policy statements of target journals at your university. Equator Network, we've already talked about. The International Committee Medical Journal Editors. The most common issue that we face internationally in terms of research and publication ethics is plagiarism. Of course it is. This means taking someone else's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving proper credit. Academically dishonest, of course, because everybody is expected to do their own work. But lots of people are unaware of some issues around plagiarism, in particular the issue of self-plagiarism. This happens a lot because people are simply unaware that they're not supposed to do it. This is where you take some of your own previously published text, maybe a paper, results, and make them appear new. So using a data set from a previous study, have to make the reader aware. Submitting a manuscript for publication containing data, conclusions, or passages that have already been published, cite the previous publication. Don't publish multiple similar papers about the same study in different journals. We sat down and made a list of the most common forms of academic plagiarism. Mosaic, that's where data from various sources is mixed together to make it seem original. Paraphrasing, even if the words differ, the original idea remains the same. And plagiarism occurs on self-plagiarism. That's where you fail to cite your own previous work thoroughly, even if you're simply revisiting an old idea or a previously published observation. Can I reuse images from my own previously published papers? Yes, you can, but you must self-cite. Otherwise, this is self-plagiarism. Check who owns the copyright, you or the journal. This is an issue in research and publishing ethics because lots of people are simply unaware that they can't take images, for example, from their own previously published paper and reuse them without getting permission. Here's an example from my own work. A traditional journal, the publisher owns the copyright. You need to ask permission and reuse and cite. Here's another example. In an open access paid for journal, you may own the copyright via a Creative Commons license, but you do need permission if you want to. You don't need permission to reuse that image, but you should cite nevertheless. Here's another example from another open access paid for journal. You own the copyright and you need to cite. You don't need permission to reuse, but you do need to cite the source. You can steal from yourself. You should be citing your own work if you are reusing images, data, figures from your own previous work. And check who owns the copyright, because in many traditional journals, you will not be the copyright owner anymore. So, avoiding accidental plagiarism, consider getting your documents evaluated by a plagiarism checking service before submission. We can provide that for you at Bentham Science publishers. Keep careful records of all your reference sources. Use reference management tools, EndNote, My Manuscript, Mendeley, for example, and check your similarity, because journals are looking for less than 10% similarity with already published sources. Otherwise, they will consider the work to be recycled. This is what a plagiarism check looks like. You can see it here. It's an example of a document submitted to a journal which has failed that plagiarism check. Now, in terms of ethical issues to consider at the submission stage, you should not be salami slicing your papers. This means publishing a paper that substantially overlaps with already published work. It's called salami slicing. Can be unethical, wastes the time of peer reviewers and editors, wastes resources and journal pages, leads to flawed meta-analyses, distorts the academic reward system, infringes on copyright, and inflates the scientific literature for no benefit other than to the author. So, avoid reporting your results one by one. This is salami slicing. Think, is this piece of work standalone? Is it similar in scope to other recent work? And check your target journal for similar papers to see what other authors do. Journals want interesting hypothesis-based studies. So these are some techniques, some tips to avoid salami slicing. Of course, journals want novelty and impact. They want you to have followed research and reporting guidelines, and they want readability and accurate formatting. So things to think about when submitting to journals. Here are some differences between the different kinds of journals out there: print only, print and online only, open access. So if you're confused about what those differences mean between different journals, I always explain this using a jazz analogy. Is this really such an obvious question? Many people ask us all the time, what's the difference between the different kinds of journals? Well, two main types, of course. Traditional journals that publish for free for authors, but then sell that content back to universities and libraries. The content is then behind a paywall. Some colleagues can't access our papers. In these journals, often you can publish there and pay a fee, an article processing charge, to turn that traditional article into what's called a green open access article. So it's available to everybody, but you've got to pay a fee. On the other side of the coin, modern open access journals often always charge an article processing charge, but don't pay it until your paper's been accepted. That's one of the ways that you can identify a predatory publisher. Have a look at the Edance Journal Selector tool, editing there on the Edance Journal site. And watch out, because some open access journals are just not good. They try to cheat you. They promise quick and easy publication. They promise open access publishing fee, charging that at submission, which is a big red flag for authors. They may copy the name of a real journal. They may have a fake website, a fake impact factor. Beware of spam emails. You can check spammers at scientificspam.net. Trustworthy journals. Have a look at thinkchecksubmit.org, as we've talked about before. Is your journal trusted and appropriate? Do you know the journal? Is it a trusted publisher? Do they have clear peer review policies and fee structures? And have a look, as I've mentioned already, at the COPE website, the Directory of Open Access Journals, the DOAJ, the OASPA, INASP, and AJOL, and submit only if okay. Here's some breakdown. thinkchecksubmit.org, a reputable publisher. Is it well known? Are the contact details of the editors and the editorial board clear? Who's on the editorial board? Do you know any of those individual academics? Can you verify that they really are on the editorial board by looking at their CV? Is the journal indexed? Common databases include the Directory of Open Access Journals, Committee on Publication Ethics. Do you recognize the authors, and are the fees for publication clearly stated on the website? Never pay for publication before your article is accepted. Don't pay for publication until your article is accepted. Predatory journals often charge a fee on submission. There's no info on the fees in their website, and they may also charge you a fee to withdraw the paper. Red flags for predators. Have a look at the website, have a look at the editorial board, Is the journal indexed in reputable indexes, ISI, Scopus, for example? And what kinds of articles is that journal publishing? Trustworthy open access journals are indexed in the doaj.org, the directory of open access journals. And again, I encourage you to have a look at publicationethics.org, the COPE Committee on Publication Ethics website, to get more information about this kind of thing. I want to mention this man. This is Jeffrey Beall. Beall's list was a list of predatory open access publishers maintained by University of Colorado librarian Jeffrey Beall. The aim of the list was to document publishers who did not perform real peer review, publishing articles for a fee. This was a good list. It was widely followed, but it was shut down in 2017 because of complaints from some publishers. Some problems with Beall's list. You can still find it indexed online. Problems are that it was maintained and controlled by just one guy, and a number of publishers ended up on the list, now frozen in time, and have not been able to get off it again. So we do not encourage the use of the Beall's list as a way of tracking down articles and journals for your papers. Have a look at the DOAJ, have a look at thinkchecksubmit.org, have a look at COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. Reputable publishers like Bentham Science publishers are members of COPE. They perform real peer review. Here are some common ethical issues to consider post-submission. We get these all the time at our journal. For example, here's one, a real situation. Paper was submitted and peer reviewed with 5 co-authors. The paper was accepted. Then one author decides that he did not agree anymore with the contents of the paper and wants to leave the article. What happens next? Journals hate these situations. All the initial co-authors have to approve the change before it can happen. So make sure you agree with the contents of an article before it gets submitted to a journal if you're listed as an author. I translated a paper in one language. Can I translate and republish it into English? Is this a good idea? Be very careful. Although translated text can be republished, you will need to very carefully cite the original article, especially any figures and tables that are reused. Happened to me. I was involved in a series of publications, first in Russian, which were then republished in English. My old friend Yevgeny Kurochkin, he published a paper in Russian. We then wrote a paper for publication in English, which appeared in 2007 in Biology Letters. The mirror of the original Russian article in the Paleontologiczny Journal then appeared in English. The two papers don't cite each other properly. Huge problems resulted. So my own experience tells me that if you are thinking of republishing something that you have perhaps already published in Turkish, let's say, make sure you cite the first version, especially if you're reusing figures. Make sure the figures are sourced in the English second publication that may come out in an English international journal. Key issues to keep in mind, of course, nobody intends to act unethically, almost nobody, I should say, and most ethical issues that occur during the publication process occur because people are simply unaware that they are making those mistakes. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Gareth. I don't know if you have any questions. If you do, you are free always to type them into the chat box down there on the right-hand side of the screen, or email me, garethdyke@gmail.com. Follow up with me afterwards. We will provide a copy of the slides from this presentation. We will also provide a recording. You can share it with your friends, your family, your contacts, your students, everybody that you like. Thank you very much for the opportunity to give this presentation today. If there are no questions, I will sign off and say have a great afternoon. Thank you very much for your attention, and take care and act ethically.